Hello, and welcome to the first meeting of the Barbados Genealogy Group for 2024. I wish you all the best for the new year. I greet those of you who are joining us on Zoom as well as those on Facebook Live. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know you're all very busy. My name is Harriet Pierce, and I am the coordinator of the Barbados Genealogy Group. Today, we welcome, no stranger to the group, Miss Angela Skeete, who will take us on journeys, a story of the Skeete family from Spring Hall, St. Lucie, to far away, and she will tell us how far away. Just a little bit about her talk. The branch of the Skeete family that Angela will focus on today originated in the north of the island in the vicinity of Spring Hall Plantation. Although we cannot trace their journey to Spring Hall, we followed them across the island and across the sea as they joined the trek through emigration to the Caribbean and the USA. They present an interesting example of the development of Barbadian US family over a 200-year period from the 1800s to present day. Angela Skeete is Chief Library and Information Services in the Research and Economic Analysis Department of the Central Bank of Barbados. She has responsibility that includes the library, records management, and knowledge management. At the Central Bank, she has been instrumental in the establishment of an e-library. She spearheads an ongoing digitization project of the bank's research publications to facilitate the e-library. Before the bank, she was a part of the Barbados National Library Service, where she worked extensively with the establishment of the library services cataloging databases. She has held positions of President and Secretary of the Library Association of Barbados. With a keen interest in family history and its role in national development, it is not a surprise that Angela has served on the executive of this group, the Barbados Genealogy Group, since its establishment in 2014. Angela has studied at the University of the West Indies, both at Cayfield and Mona, and holds degrees in English and Sociology, Library Science, and a Master's in Cultural Studies. She has a wide interest in the culture and heritage of Barbados and the Caribbean, and she's also a member of the Barbados Astronomical Society. We will soon hear from Angela, but before we do, just to remind you to hold your questions until the end of the presentation. Then we will want you to type your questions in the Q&A. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen. Or you can use the raise hand feature and make your comment or ask your question on mic. If you only want to comment, we encourage you to put those comments in the chat. So without further ado, let's invite Angela to the mic. Angela?
All right, thank you very much, Harriet, for your kind words, and welcome to everybody to this presentation. This presentation is the story of the Skeete family from Spring Hall, St. Lucie to, as I said, to faraway lands. And I said this because as I started to do the research on my family tree, what I found was that there seemed to be a pattern or a theme to it, because we were able to get all the way back to practically to slavery, well, really to slavery. And then we saw a natural progression away from the plantation, across the parish, across the island, across the sea, going all the way to the Caribbean. All right. As we said, the story shows the descendants of a man called Sepio Skeete, who originated in the Spring Hall, St. Lucie area. He is actually the earliest relative that we could find. And the first they used the Skeete name. For some reason, my thing's giving me some. All right, I started with an overview because for those of you who do family research, you will know that you should always start with yourself first. You start with yourself first and you work backwards. You go through your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, etc., etc. And we were quite lucky when we started to do this because we found a lot of original documents. So this doesn't always happen this easily. But when we started to work, we found that the particular Skeete family were kind of very good in relation to doing their documents. So there were baptismal records and there were marriage records and so on, and they were all following in due course. So if I do a general overview and I start with myself, I worked back to my father, Clyde Austin Skeete, to his father, who was Curtis Theophilus Wilberforce, to his father, who was William Allen Skeete, to his father, who was John Skeete, and then to Sepio Skeete, which is where we could go no further than that. But in fact, we were able to get through 5 generations of persons. Let me say something about the Spring Hall area. Spring Hall is a large plantation. In 1813, it comprised 384 acres. When slavery was abolished in 1834, there were 374 enslaved persons living there. The owner was a man named William Hines. A little bit of more background. Slavery was abolished in 1834, followed with a period of enforced apprenticeship that was abandoned on August the 1st, 1838. To give a little bit of information that I probably should right at the beginning, in terms of the resources that we use, the primary resource was the Archives Department. All the original records are found in the Archives Department, so we use them very heavily, but we also supported that with FamilySearch.org and to a lesser extent, Ancestry.com. They were quite useful. As I said, having given you the overview, I'm gonna kind of then work the other way because I'm gonna start with Sepio himself and come forward so you can see the journey that they actually take. Now, the Spring Hall Plantation, the reality is that because of the density of the population in Barbados, there was no alternative work. There was no available land for persons to relocate after slavery. So what tended to happen is that when slavery ended, persons remained on the plantation for a number of years. So when we were doing the research, what we found was that some 5 years after the end of slavery and the apprenticeship system, that Sepio Skeete's address remained as Spring Hall. Now, with that in mind, I explored the Spring Hall Plantation slave registers to see what I could find out about him. Now, Sepio, he likely lived most of his life during slavery. We know that he died sometime between 1843 and 1852. we were able to find him because he is listed on his son's marriage certificate. And one of the things that persons who are doing this research, it's a very useful thing, is when you look at these very old marriage certificates, you will find that it was a practice to list the father of the groom and the father of the bride on the marriage certificate, along with their occupation. So you were able to get quite a bit of information. And as we worked our way back through the various family members, we found this man named Sepio Skeete. And I remember at the time I questioned the people at the archives department because I'd never heard of a name Sepio. I mean, what kind of name was that? And they told me that this was a slave name. This was one of these arbitrary names that people were assigned because they didn't really want it, they took the time to learn people's names. So he was assigned the name Sepio. But the important thing about Sepio is that in 1843, Sepio assumes the name Skeete. He was baptized as an adult on September the 9th, 1843. He is a blacksmith. His address is given as Spring Hall, St. Lucie. So with that in mind, I surmise that he was probably still living on the plantation at the time because it's only about 5 years after the end of the apprenticeship period. But he is the first person that we found using the name Sepio, Skeete, the first Skeete, so to speak. Little is known about Sepio before 1843, because as you may know, on the plantations, there are no surnames. Enslaved persons were not given surnames. But I tried to see if I could find him in the Spring Hall Plantation slave registers. And this revealed actually more than one listing for Sepio, because, as I said, this was an arbitrary name that is assigned. But I did find a Sepio who is a blacksmith who could possibly be him. I also found listings for several children on the plantation, several of them named John, who could have been Sepio's son, John. And there was also a listing among the children for a child named Phoeba. And you will see how this becomes relevant later. Just to say something about the slave registers. The slave registers were established by the colonial powers following the abolition of the slave trade in 1807, and to combat the illicit transportation to the colonies. The slave registers of enslaved persons to the plantations were established, and they recorded births and deaths. And they were done every 3 years between 1817 and 1843. So there is a lot of useful information there, but unfortunately there are no surnames. But you can kind of surmise what is going on. The slave registers are available online. They are on Ancestry.com and a couple of other sites. So I use Ancestry.com to have a look at this. Unfortunately, as I said, at this point, it is still a bit of conjecture because I don't know for sure, but I am surmising that most likely Sepio Skeete originates on Spring Hall because that has given us his address at his adult baptism. And I am figuring that his son is also born on the plantation. His son is John Skeete, and as I said, we find John on his marriage certificate, and we find reference to his father, Sepio Skeete. On the marriage certificate as well, there is a note next to Sepio Skeete's name that seems to suggest that Sepio might already have passed. This is 1852. John marries Phoebe Jane Leacock on July the 29th, 1852. He's 29 years old and she is 24. So you see that John is also born in the slave period. and most likely might have grown up on Spring Hall Plantation as well. He is listed as a herdsman at the time of his marriage. And the other thing that struck me is that he signs his certificate with an X, which means that he's not literate. And his wife also signs certificate with an X. John marries and has 7 children. Now, you remember I said that on the slave register, I saw reference to a child named Phoebe. The interesting thing with John's certificate, so he has 7 children. His first son is Prince William Albert Skeete, who was born 1852 as well. And his mother's name is listed as Phoebe Jane Skeete. And it does kind of make you wonder whether this is the same Phoebe that we saw on the earlier in the slave registers. Again, I can't prove that, but I like to think that maybe this is the same person. All other records of her name is anglicized as Phoebe, and all the other children's baptismal records, she is called Phoebe. But interestingly enough, on this first child, her name is given as Phoebe, Phibba. There are 7 children: Prince Albert, Prince William Albert, Martha, 1855, Althea Jane, 1856, Priscilla Ann, 1859, Joseph Albert, 1861, William Allen Skeete, 1863. William Allen is my great-grandfather. And Sarah Elizabeth Gertrude, 1870. Now, for those other persons who are doing research into the Skeete family, these names are important because there's a chance that a number of people who might be doing research may have descended from one of these. Now, my great-grandfather was William Allen Skeete. And when I was doing the research, I followed his line pretty straight, all the way down the line. So it's only recently that I went back and I started to look at William Allen's brothers and sisters. And I started, for instance, Joseph Alfred Skeete had 7 children. And I know that one of the sisters married a Belgrave. So there is a chance that if you're doing research into Skeete family or a Belgrave family from the Boscobel area and so on, that there's a chance that this is an area that you may want to research. But as I said, I've only started to look at them recently, so I don't have a lot of information on them. I should say, in relation to John Skeete as well, he is listed as living in various parts of St. Lucie, but he eventually finds himself in the Boscobel area, and his work is, I think that's in the next slide. John was a laborer, a herdsman. He's listed at various times as a laborer, a herdsman, or a butcher across the various documents. And his address shifts further and further away from the plantation. And his last 3 children, he is listed as living near Boscobel, St. Peter. He's obviously a fairly industrious person, and he's doing quite a lot of different things. And that brought me to William Allen, who is an interesting person. William Allen Skeete lived between 1863 to 1958. So he actually crosses the two centuries. He stretches back to slavery, in that his father and his grandfather were enslaved persons, but he comes into a new century. He marries Edith Allen Crick on November 23rd, 1889. He has 8 children. He is described, my father, who grew up with him, My father described him as a boss carpenter. All of his records list him as a carpenter. Now, from what I seem to understand from my father, a boss carpenter was actually a contractor because he built houses. And one of the things, and it's interesting that I'm doing this now because when the genealogy group first opened, I think I may have given this story at one of the sessions. I really felt as though I touched history with him because there was a family story which said, my mother told me that when I was born, a few days after I was born, they wrapped me up in a blanket and took me for the old man to see. He was well into his 90s at this time. And I think I was his first great grandchild. And I was handed for him to hold. Now, when I sat down and thought about that, it really kind of struck me. I felt as though I had reached through time and touched the whole period. You know, when I thought about the fact that his father and his grandfather were both born during the period of slavery and lived part of their life under the slavery system. And I thought about the fact that I was held by this old man. It really kind of brings the whole thing home to you. He was quite an interesting personality. To say a little something about the photographs, this is the only photograph we have of him. The two photographs next to it are he's with his grandchildren. The person sitting in the front row is my father. The person being the people in the back are several of his grandchildren, Pat, Tony, Joan, and Jack, Bess, and most likely Jean is somewhere there as well. This photograph was taken at Bathsheba. Now, he seemed to have been relatively comfortable because my father said that he would, during the summer, rent a bay house and take the family to Bathsheba for a week, and they would spend some time at Bathsheba. When I said he's an interesting person, he does some interesting things. His birth certificate and so on lists their residence as the Boscobel area, because this is where John finally settled with his family. But William Allen marries at Holy Innocents Church in St. Thomas. He and his wife signed their marriage certificate, suggesting that by now education has become part of it. They are literate. William moves his young family to St. Michael and builds a house in 2 Mile Hill, St. Michael. The family folklore is that he followed his favorite priest named William Parker, who was reassigned from Holy Innocents to St. Barnabas Church close to 2 Mile Hill. So my great-grandfather picks up his entire family because he particularly likes this priest, and he moves to St. Michael. The impression I got from what my father said is that he was somewhat of a strong-willed man who achieves a certain level of comfort in his life. He has 8 children. His eldest son, Curtis Theophilus Wilberforce, is my grandfather. The second son is John Burley Skeete. Coleridge William Parker Skeete, note the name. Coleridge William Parker apparently does not live past his first year. So he promptly names his next child William Parker because he's determined that one of his children is going to be named after this man. Edna Bullitt Skeete, who did not live long either. Edith Ursula Skeete, Alan Thamanda Skeete, and Beryl Gwendolyn Skeete. Now, a point of interest, when I did some research on his brothers and sisters, I found that the brother that I did manage to delve into, and I found a number of children for him, the actual names of the children are very similar. So I found a Thamanda and several Ediths, a couple of Williams, So they were naming their children, they were giving their children the same. The pictures are his daughters, who are Aline Thamonda, that we call Antal, Beryl Gwendolyn Skeete, who eventually became a head teacher. I think she was at Edge Hill Memorial Primary School, but as a small child, I remember her as a head teacher at the school. Edith Ursula Skeete Bess is the other sister there. Beryl Skeete, my memory of her is that for her time, she drove a car, and back in the 60s, that was still considered a little bit of a thing. Women were driving cars, but she renovated the family house and she drove her own car to and from work. Again, the interesting thing is how fast the family developed. And it is at this point that the Skeete family take a very determined route off the island, because up to this point, they're moving further from the plantation and they're moving across Barbados. And from here on down, now they're moving outside of Barbados altogether. Curtis Theophilus Wilberforce Skeete is my grandfather, and he is the first one who leaves the island altogether. He leaves the island in his 20s and heads to the US. And he marries twice. His first marriage, Mabel Lewis Story, ends in divorce, but they leave my father as a baby in Barbados, like so many other families in Barbados where children were left with grandparents. And as the parents head off in search of a better life. So the two pictures below, he remarries. As I said, that first marriage did not last, the divorce. And he remarries Myrtle B. Helms and has a second son. And the pictures below are Clyde Austin Skeete, who's my father, and Charles Michael Skeete, who is his son from his second marriage. Curtis becomes a doctor in Long Island. He's actually credited as one of the first Black doctors in Long Island, and being instrumental in setting up the first branch of the NAACP in Long Island, New York. There is actually a book written on the prominent Black families in the Long Island area, and there is an item in that book on him and what he did. So it's interesting that Curtis is just, I think, like 3 generations away from Sepio. But there's a certain level of determination. You know, he said to me when I was a child that moving into the US, of course, would not have been easy. But he was determined that he wanted to be a doctor, and he did various jobs, including waiting on tables and so on, to support himself in his quest to become a doctor. The second brother, John Burley Skeete, married Maud Allen, who was also, I think she came from here as well. And they have 4 children. Ruby Agatha Skeete Branch, who was actually born in Barbados, also left when they went off to the US, but who, as a small child, was then, they sent for her and she joined them in the US. He has 3 other children, John Burley Skeete, 1915 to 1984, Marjorie Evelyn Skeete Gibbons, 1917 to 2007, and Ione Elsie Skeete Ellaby. These are US Skeetes, because neither my grandfather nor the other brother, William Parker Skeete, who I've not been able to get a lot of information on, none of them came back to Barbados to live. And they created a US branch of the Skeete family. The picture below, the 2 pictures, John Burley and his wife Maud, and then a picture of Charles, who is my uncle Curtis's second son, and cousin Ione Skeete Ellaby, who visited us in Barbados This was on a visit to Barbados. I'd like to shout out this branch of the family. They actually held a reunion in Barbados last year in May. And a number of John Burley's descendants, friends, and family came here. I think they were celebrating the birthday of his oldest direct descendant, Marlene. So they joined us in Barbados for a vacation. Edith Ursula. Now, the interesting thing was that William Allen Skeete's daughters remained on the island, and his sons and all of his grandsons left. So Edith Ursula, she married Garnet Milton Bess in Barbados, and she had 5 children. So Garnet Skeete, Jack, who we knew as Jack, was born in 1927. Jean Blanette Bess, 1926. I think she's actually the eldest, 1926. Garnet in 27. Joan in 29. I don't have the dates for Patricia Bess and Tony Bess, but they were younger members of the family. Of her children, both of her sons also left Barbados in search of a better life. They also went to study medicine, and they later practiced in the US and in Germany. Tony died last year in Germany, and they both have families living between the US and Germany, respectively. So there's a trend of the male Skeetes all leaving the island for a better life. And the grandsons followed him. Now, my father was the only one who grew up completely, the best children grew up here and then left. My father grew up with his grandparents, having been left here, and opted not to go to the US when they tried to send for him. He was sort of an age where he could make up his own mind on that. And he decided he wasn't going, and he did not go to the US, but my father left as well. When his time came, he opted, instead of going north, my father went south, and he went to the island of Curacao and worked in the oil refineries, the oil refinery there for over 20 years, but returned to Barbados, and he's actually the only one who returned to Barbados. Pictures there of the best children, Pat, Jean, and Joan, and Jack and Tony in their younger years. Now, so that kind of brings me to the future. And the story of the descendants of Sepio and John Skeete, to me, reflect certainly the pride and industry motto of this country. Sepio, I think, may not have escaped the plantation. We have no record of him properly after his baptism. He seemed to have already passed by the time his son got married. So he seemed to have remained all his years in that area. But from the time his son John starts to, by the time he gets married, he starts to move the family across the parish. And we see a steady movement away from St. Lucie. We also see a steady move using education and the way that they developed to the point where they have become largely a part of the Barbadian diaspora. As I said, last year we had a reunion, which you can see some of the photographs there. Some of these are the descendants of John Burley Skeete, and they came to the island last year to celebrate Marlene's birthday. And they were very keen. This presentation is actually a modified version of that presentation that was done for them. Now, one of the things that struck me about this is that at this point, I am the last of William Allen's last of his descendants. living in Barbados because all of the others have passed and the family are now part of the Barbados diaspora. So I do ask the question, does the determination and success of the original families mean the disappearance of some of the original families from the Barbados landscape? Because now this side of the Skeete family are living almost entirely in the US and a couple of other countries in the world. I do believe that there are a number of Skeetes still here who may well be descendants of William Allen's brothers and sisters. I've now just started the research on that. I will continue doing the research. But I found evidence as well that they also started to move into the US. I found a number of them in the Ellis Island records that seem to relate back to those brothers and sisters. But as I said, I'm still doing the research on that at the moment. So I end my presentation with a picture of the monument. This is a new monument that was opened just a few years ago in the Freedom Park in Bridgetown. And as part of the park, they built a monument to the families, the Barbadian families and the Barbadian family names. And like everybody else, the day after this was open, I trotted down there with my camera and I went looking for my family. And I found it. I found Skeete there. And I not only found Skeete, there's a section of the monument that's dedicated to enslaved persons and some of the arbitrary names that they were given. No surnames, no nothing, just arbitrary names. And among that, I found the name Sepio. So I pretty much dedicate this presentation to Sepio, who is the first person that I have been able to trace who used the name Skeete. I have no idea why he selected the name Skeete, what was there about it that he selected, but he selected the name Skeete. And we all carry that name since then. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. So I believe that at this point I will open the presentation up to the floor.
Thank you so much, Angela. Just to repeat, if there's anyone who wants to ask a question or make a comment, please do so in the question and answer in the Q&A and your comments in the chat session. Okay, I have Carol Tucker. So my name is Carol King Tucker. My paternal grandmother was Alberta Skeete and was married to Thomas King. How many brothers did my grandfather have? I'm not sure if you'd, were those names in your
Actually,
family?
she said Alberta.
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 Yeah, Elberta.
Oh, Alberta. Okay. Okay. Now, as I said, I started doing research on the William Allen Skeete's brothers and sisters. I'm looking for that. And among them, I found, I'm going to give you the name. Yeah. Yeah, William Allen has a number of brothers and sisters, right? I'm looking for that particular slide so I can list the names. And because I know that among them, I found a name that wasn't Alberta, it was Albertine, I think it was. And yeah. Yes, remember I said that William Allen had 6 brothers and sisters, because John Skeete has 7 children. And one of them, Joseph Alfred, had 7 children. No, I don't have the 7 children listed here because I started doing this only recently. But I do believe that the name, it wasn't Alberta, but I think I saw an Alberta. I have not done a lot of research on that, but there were records on the Ellis Island records of, I think, an Alberta or Albertine, something like that, who comes through Ellis Island along with a number of younger children. But I have just started to explore this a little more. So I don't know, maybe Harriet can pass on my email address and you can contact me and I'll let you know what I found in relation to that person.
Okay, thanks, Angela. So, Carol, you heard Angela's answer, and I will also direct you to the online resource, familysearch.org, which has Barbados records from 1637 to 1930. So you can also do some research on your own in the comfort of your home. I will ask Anastasia to type my email address so that anyone who wants to contact Angela can send an email to me and I will forward that email address. Okay, we have from Dorian Straker Corbin. She said, could you repeat the name of the Skeete who moved to Boscobel and married a Belgrave? I'm a Belgrave descendant from Boscobel. I'm researching my family. I have a tree on Ancestry.
Okay. The John Skeete, remember I said that Sepio's son John, who was various things. He was a herdsman, he was a laborer, they described him as a butcher in different places. He has 7 children. And among the 7 children, one of them, I can't remember which one now. Again, I have only recently, like within the last week, in preparation for this presentation, I started to look at some of these other brothers and sisters, and one of them married a Belgrave. So this is either Althea Jane or Sarah Elizabeth. There's also Priscilla Ann. So one of them married a Belgrave. As I said, I did this research. I've been doing this research for years. I started this, my grandfather died in 1977, and to deal with in clearing up his business, because he was in the US, we were asked to find birth certificates for all of his brothers and sisters. And I was, obviously, I was the person who was given the responsibility of finding that, and I went to the archives department. So I started this all the way back then. So this would have been around 1977. And I've done it in spurts. So I did it then pretty much following my direct line. So it is only recently that I really started to look at these other branches of the family. So I can tell you that it's either Althea Jane, Priscilla Ann, or Sarah. I'm going to go back and explore this some more and update this information. So again, if you contact me, I would go back and look at my records and let you know which one it was that became a Belgrave. But John Skeete moved. The last address that we had for him was Boscobel. And we know that his son, William Albert, is still in Boscobel when his address is still Boscobel when he gets married. So we know for sure they're in Boscobel, and I can tell you that one of them married a Belgrave. But I'm still doing that particular research. I think.
Thanks, Angela. We have 2 who are referencing the Skeetes from Rock Hall in St. Lucie. And this one says, as anonymous attendee, I am the granddaughter of Felix Augustus Skeete, who was born in Rock Hall, St. Lucie. His father's name was Thomas.
Okay.
And there's another one, Jennifer Haynes, who asks if you know of the Skeete family in Rock Hall, St. Lucie, and if you know of any connection.
Well, I can tell you this. Every time I meet a Skeete and I ask, where's your family from? And they say, oh, St. Lucie or Norfolk. I say, okay, we're some kind of family. But because it seems that all of the Skeets originated in this area. Now, what I have not been able to find out was if Sepio had more children. I mean, I believe he may have had more children, but for whatever reason, and it's also because, you know, the records, you're dependent on what was done in terms of the records when slavery ended. The church apparently went in and made a serious effort to try to get these people baptized and into the church and so on. So whatever you think about them, the reality is that our ability to find this information has a lot to do with the fact that they went in there and they encouraged people to get baptized and they created records. So the only son that I find a record for Sepio is John Skeete. There may be more. Now, the fact that John had so many children and that those children have also branched off means that certainly on John's side, you know, the chances are we're going to find a lot of Skeets. As I said, I don't know if Sepio had more Skeets. My particular family, because they moved to St. Michael, we lost contact with the family in the north. The last person was Antal, which was Tamonda, I think was her name, Annie Tamonda. But she, and I may take after her, I guess, because she maintained an interest in the family up north, and she was the last person who still had the contact. And my father would tell me that Antal told him about this relative and that body, next body, who was still up north. But once she passed and my father passed, I don't know who any of the Skeete relatives are in the north of the island. As I said, I just started doing that part of it recently, so I can't tell you right at the moment that I know, but I do know that John and his 7 children probably have several branches all in that Boscobel area. Because the thing was that they remained, as far as I could tell, they remained in the north of the island. So Boscobel, St. Lucie, all those areas you're gonna find Skeete family.
Thanks, Angela. Okay, we have someone who wants to know if this presentation will be made available. This is, of course, Angela's decision.
Yeah, my information, a lot of my information is in ancestry.com. I kind of made a conscious effort to put the information into ancestry.com because you know my side of the family has almost disappeared from Barbados. I felt as though I owed it to the Skeets out there. And we're finding every now and then that the young ones are taking an interest, and the Skeets in the future if I put my information up. So I don't know if you've ever used Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com actually, you can make your family, you can make your family trees public. It's entirely up to you whether you do that or not. But when you do that, then the trees are available for searching. So when you run a search in Ancestry.com, they run it not only against the records that they have, they also run it against family trees that have been made public in the in the database. And I did make my Skeete family tree public. So, but what to do is to, I think, Harriet, let the person contact me, and I'll speak to them a little more, see if I can help them in terms of the direction that we'll go in, and then we'll talk about the presentation.
Okay, for sure. Then my email address is in the chat, library@barbmuse.org.bb. So any person who wants to make direct contact with Angela, just contact me and I will forward your information. Okay, we have a follow-up from Carol Tucker, who has said that her grandmother's sister, Albertina, you didn't mention that Albertina was married to Thomas's brother. So that is just an additional information. But I think Carol, she's one of the persons who you suggested make contact with me, that they can speak with you a bit more about that connection.
Because I saw a name, Albertina. I did see a name. I'm pretty. It sounded like Albertina. I saw a name, Albertina, and this was in relation. There were a couple of other children in there. There was an Ursula actually. I knew that other child that was in there because I knew her as Sis. We used to call her Aunt Sis, but her name was actually Ursula. She was in that record, and a sister called Ruth, and I think a brother. And then there was this other person named Albertina, who was also, because the Ellis records list all of the family members who are coming through Ellis Island. And there were a series of these Skeete names who came through Ellis Island. So, contact me and I'll take it from there.
Okay, thanks. Carol, just a follow-up. Please, you've typed your email address here, but please type it and send it to me at library@barbmuse.org.bb. That address is in the chat somewhere, library@barbmuse.org.bb. Okay, Angela, believe it or not, we have somebody Skeete in England. She said her grandmother's name was Sylvia Skeete, and she married Oliver Carlisle Broom, St. Lucie again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Broom is, and I'm sure Harriet will tell you this. Broom is a very common, popular name in the St. Lucie area. That's a prominent family in the north as well. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. We have another one with Jennifer Haynes, where she's saying that her paternal grandmother was Louise Rosetta Skeete, and she was from Rock Hall. So I guess we need to be looking at that Rock Hall connection. Okay, we from an anonymous attendee. Thank you for a fascinating presentation. Please, can you kindly repeat the name of the slave registry you use?
All right. There's slave registries for all of the British colonial countries that had the slavery systems. Now there are, so each island has its lists of slave registers. The slave registers are then divided up by plantation, because each plantation had to submit every 3 years a register. It's like a census. They had to submit a list of all of the enslaved persons on the plantation. It also included, it has ages, so it has them by age. It lists the persons who died. It lists the number that were born. It has only first names, remember that. And it also lists persons who would have been manumitted or freed. It has its limitations, as I said, because there are no surnames. But in my case, I kind of surmise that, they're coming off of Spring Hall Plantation, because knowing and it's useful to know the history of the country when you're doing this research, because unlike some of the other islands in the region, when slavery ended, people could not really leave the plantation because there was nowhere to go. There was no work, there was nowhere to go, and there was also some pretty harsh pieces of legislation which did their best to try to force people to remain on the plantation. So chances are that 5 years after the ending of the apprenticeship period, that Sepio is still living on the plantation. But we certainly see his son then moving further and further and further away. But there are a number of Skeetes in the St. Lucie, St. Peter, St. Thomas area. So obviously there were a number of Skeetes, and a lot of them congregated in that area. As I said, my great grandfather was an interesting person because he picked up his family and followed his favorite reverend across the island. He was very influenced by this reverend, and he was influenced enough to pick up the family and move to St. Michael.
Now, with some reverend, perhaps you need to do a bit of research into this reverend to see what about him, his sermons, what about him was so influential.
Yeah, he was a bit of a character because my father said that they moved this man from Holy Innocents, and he said that at the time when they moved him, apparently St. Barnabas, was a little. It was a parochial church and so on. It wasn't that well supported, and this man is reputed. My father said he's reputed to. They have sent him to this church, and my father said the first thing that he apparently did was to march to all of the plantation owners who were living nearby and inform them that he had taken up the position and that he expected them not only to attend church, but to support the development of the church. and apparently, they complied. So he had some gumption. And that apparently influenced my great grandfather quite a bit. So he, as he said, picked up the family and moved to St. Michael.
Yeah. Interesting. We have another one from an anonymous attendee. She said, asking in terms of the surname Skeete, did you check the history of the ownership of Spring Hall Plantation? And did you also check the occurrence of the Skeete surname in St. Lucie or Barbados?
Yeah. I did. Sorry I didn't mention that. That was actually in my notes. The plantation was owned by a man named William Hines. There's no association of the owner of the plantation with the Skeete name. No. Well, let me say up front, I am not a historian. I believe that the historians themselves would comment on this. But I get the impression from the research that I have done, because I've also done research on my mother's side and so on, that there seem to have been where people took the names, and Harriet, maybe you could back me up with this, where people took the names of the plantation owners seems to correlate more so to if they were sort of like children of the plantation owners. And I saw that on my mother's side, where my mother's father's family took the Bentham name, and they came off of a plantation that was owned by a man named Bentham. And in their case, he had 9 children from one of his slaves, and he actually manumitted her and all of 9 of his children. And he actually left them, he in his will, he left the plantation to them. They assumed the Bentham name. And so we can trace that directly. But in this case, remember that Spring Hall Plantation had over 300 people on it. And so I see no association at all with the name of the plantation owner. But the name Skeete, as you would have seen from the comments here and the questions, seem to be, they definitely come from the St. Lucie area, St. Lucie, St. Thomas, Boscobel, all those different parts of St. Lucie, you see the Skeete name popping up again and again. But I don't know why he chose the name Skeete. I have no idea. But we know that 1842 is 43 is the first official record of a Skeete that we were able to find.
Okay. Thanks, Angela. Yes, I know there's a general belief that enslaved took the names of the plantation owners, but that is a very simplistic way of looking at the adoption of surnames. It is much more complex than that. And I can refer persons to an article by Pedro Lodge looking at names and naming, and even by Jerome Handler looking at names and naming, so that they have a better understanding of how names were adopted, not just plantation owners' names, but some names of occupations, of people who influence them, so there are a number of factors that went into names and naming. We do have a question from Linda Lewis, who is asking if you have done your DNA.
Yes, I did. I thought about putting that in, I actually did a slide and then I took it back out. DNA is very complex, right? But I did, and again, I felt a bit like it was being a bit conjecture to a large extent. But I did do my DNA, and the interesting thing was about it. Now, your DNA, you take 50% of your DNA from your mother, 50% from your father. And they actually do a breakdown for each parent. Now, they don't tell you, they don't say, this is your mother, this is your father, but they give you a breakdown, which is for parent A and parent B. And they ask you if you can identify which one is your mother and which one is your father. And I looked at this thing and I said, okay, that's my father. because when I looked at it, and I'll see if I can find it, yes. When I looked at it, one side of it was 35% of my, well, what I decided was my paternal DNA was of African origin. Now that was completely flipped on my mother's side, because my mother has all the Creole things happening, enough things happening going on her side. But on my father's side, as you see, it's very straight, very direct. You find all the records, everything is clear, no drama, right clear down the road. So the DNA results was 35% of African origin, and it had 50% Benin and Togo, 11% Nigeria, 1% Ivory Coast, 5% Mali, 2% Cameroon, 1% Senegal. And the interesting thing was that on my mother's side, the African DNA was smaller, and the countries were completely different. It was not these, because I have 50% Benin and Togo and 11% Nigeria. I had a completely different set of countries for her side. So I surmise that this 35% I'm coming from my father. My father's origin, of course, I can't say for sure, what is what, because you're pulling from each person along the way. But I like to think that somewhere in there is part of Sepio's journey. Now, it's highly likely that he was born in Barbados, because the slave trade ended in 1807. So chances are that he was actually born here and not born in Africa itself. But I do believe that, part of me likes to think, maybe Benin, Togo, maybe a little bit of Nigeria, some of Mali. I don't know. I don't know. But I did, yes, I did do the DNA. The other interesting thing about the DNA, let me say that now, was when I did the DNA, I did the DNA after the family reunion that we had here. And one of the first things that happened when I saw the results, because they also identify persons who are likely to be, your relatives and so on. And top of the list was, guess who? The same lady Marlene who came to Barbados last year. They were celebrating her birthday, and she was Marlene, yeah. She is the closest, what's the term I want to use? She is John Berlin Skeete's probably great granddaughter or something of the sort. But she is the eldest of those relatives in the US, and it identified her right away as being my closest relative that they found. And I said, yeah, this DNA thing really works, because that really struck me. Yeah.
Thanks, Angela. We have a couple questions from Facebook. Okay, we have Stacy Cooper. Do the Skeetes have any connection to the Barnett family? You ever came across any Barnetts in your research?
Not yet. As I said, I've been pretty focused in research that I was doing straight down the line. So it's only recently that I started to look at the branches where the tree is branching out. So I have not seen the Barnet yet, but I promise you that I'm gonna do a little more work on John Skeete's other children and see what other names pop up on that. Yeah.
Thanks. For Kay Nichols, I think you are referring to familysearch.org, which I mentioned earlier, which has Barbados records from 1637 until 1930. And that is a database operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's free and it's very, very rich as it relates to Barbadian information, the vital records, church and civil records. And that would have been, Angela, you would have used that extensively in your research.
I used it extensively, but understand that I started at the Barbados Archive. That was where my original search was. What I did with familysearch.org was that I then reinforced what I did at the archives with Family Search. The big thing about Family Search and Ancestry is the indexing. The indexing is important because it is when you can go into a database and you put a couple of names into a text box and pull up very quickly what they might have. Now, I'm not saying that it's easy because even with that, it still takes quite a bit of effort. Also, they are still in the process of indexing the records. And they have records for countries all over the world. They've been very good about indexing the records. Family Search is free. That's the important thing. They provide access free. And they also use their members to do the indexing. Now, this is a good thing, but it also has a few issues because sometimes you find mistakes. You obviously look at your record. Obviously, people are looking at handwritten records. And we all know how hard it is to decipher handwritten records. So sometimes they look at a name and they don't get the name quite right, or they might spell Skeete. For instance, in the ancestry records coming out of Ellis Island and so on, sometimes I found Skeete spelled without the E. So they just put SKEET. So things like that can also create problems when you're trying to run a search. But being able to run a search is really very, very important. And that's where they complement the archives department considerably. If you need records for legal purposes, you have to go to the archives department, right? You have to go to archives. Because once you find the record, whatever you find, and I know my way around computers, so I did screenshots in some cases of some of the records and so on. Because you can actually pull up the digital copy of the record. You can pull up the certificate and look at it. And there's more information on that digital copy, like where people live, their address, the whole business of the occupations and so on. If you can look at the original copy, then sometimes you find additional information. At the archives, the documents are old, they're fragile, they don't want you touching them up. You can't touch them up because various reasons. So having the electronic copy is very, very useful. But if you need a legal copy, as we did for my grandfather, you have to go to archives and they will, I can't remember if they gave me the information to take to the registry or if they sent the information to the registry, but the certificate is issued by the registry, but you have to work between the archives and the registry. So you need both of them. Ancestry.com is very useful if you're doing research into the US. Anybody who passes through Ellis Island, all that information is in Ancestry.com. US Census records, all kind of things. Draft records, if they join the Army, death records, newspaper records. You'll be amazed the things you'll find in Ancestry.com. But Ancestry has a cost. You have to pay for Ancestry. But if you are researching your family who went into the US, then Ancestry is a very useful option.
Thank you. And Angela, you actually made a connection here. We have somebody from Dorian Straker Corbin. She said that she just checked her DNA matches, and the two of you are matches at the 5th and 6th cousin level. Okay. So you met a cousin there, Dorian Straker Corbin. So I just want to remind persons, my name is Harriet Pierce, and my email address is in the chat, library@barbnews.org.bb. If you wish to make contact with Angela, just send me an email with your contact details and I will pass them on. And with what information you are seeking, and I will pass that on to Angela.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, so let's see if we have anything else here. I think they have exhausted all our, I don't think I have missed anything. Anastasia, is there anything that I have not seen? Right, no, I don't think so. Yeah, so I just want to thank you, Angela, for a very interesting presentation and interaction with the audience, because it really underlined your journey, your use of the records, not just your specific information about your family, but the range of records you use, the importance of deciphering the information on those records, the importance of having at least some knowledge of Barbadian history, that you can place those records within context. And of course, just being willing to share that journey of Sepio with us up to present day and seeing his name there embossed in the Freedom Park. So thank you so much for sharing.
Just let me, as I said, shout out the family group who may be watching, or because I did send this information on to them, or may watch the recording afterwards. The group that came in to Barbados last year and did a family family reunion. Shout out Marlon, Helena, Gabby, and a number of young ones. I was really, really happy to see a number of young members who took quite a keen interest because I did this presentation for them last year. I also want to shout out the Best Family. They have a very active WhatsApp family group that would be the children of Jack and Tony Best, Crystal and Roger and the others in Germany and so on, and their extended family members, just giving them a shout out.
Thank you. So thank you all. If the family is watching, I hope they are. But to
If
hear
they don't
that
watch this,
shout
they'll
out.
probably watch the recorded.
Yes, so we have to remind persons that the session was recorded and it will be uploaded to the museum's YouTube channel. And for those of you who were interested in Family Search Database, we do have a video, a presentation on our YouTube channel, which tells you how to use the database. So look for using online sources for your family research. There are two of them, volume 1 and 2, parts 1 and 2. Part 2 look primarily at family search. Part 1 will look at other resources such as Caribbean family history, Ellis Island, and so on. So there are some interesting tools that are there for you to go back to and to assist with your family research. So thanks again, Angela. And I am hoping that because there's so much interest, that when you have done some additional research, we can have a part 2. Who knows, we may find that Rock Hall connection.
Yes, yes.
So thanks again. And thank you all. If you're on Zoom or Facebook, thank you for joining us for our very first session for the year. And thank you for the robust interaction we had today. I will tell you our next meeting is going to be on March 21st, at which we will have David O'Carroll, one of our UK members, who will be speaking on the Gall family of Barbados. And he will also be giving some tips on how to move from research to publication.
Okay, that'll be good.
Yes. So I hope that we will see you then. So Angela, thank you. Thank you, audience. And thank you so much, Anastasia, for being there to make sure that we are technically correct. I will see you all. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.